The first shots don't sound like war. They sound like confusion. Sharp cracks echo across open water, too sudden, too close. On the bridge, no one moves at first. The radar shows nothing unusual. The route was cleared, the passage was approved. Then another burst closer. This time, metal shutters. Someone shouts. The captain grabs the radio, voice tight, controlled, refusing panic. This is a commercial tanker. We were cleared to transit. Why are we taking fire? No reply. Only static and more gunfire. Outside, the sea is empty. No warships, no warning. Just fast-moving shadows cutting across the waterline. The helmsman hesitates. Forward or turn back? Another impact answers for him. Hard to port. The ship groans as it begins to turn. Massive engines resisting the sudden command. Too slow, too exposed. And then the realization spreads through the crew like a silent shockwave. This wasn't an accident. They were allowed in, just to be turned back under fire. The tanker had already committed to the narrow corridor when the situation collapsed. Minutes earlier, everything had been routine. Clearance received, course plotted, speed reduced for safe passage. The crew moved with quiet efficiency, trusting the system that governed one of the most sensitive waterways on Earth. Then the radio changed. Voices overlapped, unfamiliar, urgent, fragmented, instructions that didn't match earlier clearance, warnings that arrived too late to matter. And then came the gunfire. At first, it felt distant, something happening to someone else. But the sound closed in quickly, snapping across the surface of the water, echoing off steel. The first visible impact sent a spray of seawater across the bow. That's when panic tried to take hold. But the captain forced it back. He keyed the radio again, this time louder, sharper. "We are on your approved transit list. Confirm your orders." Silence. The bridge filled with tension so thick it felt physical. Every second stretched. Every decision carried weight. Then a new voice cut through, unidentified, aggressive, issuing commands that contradicted everything they had been told. The crew looked to the captain. He didn't hesitate. "Turn us around." The engines pushed against inertia, the massive hull responding slowly, painfully. The ship was never designed for sudden maneuvers. It was built for steady, predictable movement, not survival under fire. Another burst struck the waterline, close enough to feel. The crew moved faster now. No one spoke unless necessary. Training took over where fear threatened to break through. Outside, small vessels darted in and out of view, fast, agile, impossible to track consistently. They weren't trying to sink the ship. They were sending a message. Within minutes, the tanker had reversed course, retreating from the passage it had just been allowed to enter. No casualties, minimal damage. But the psychological impact was immediate, because the real question wasn't what just happened. It was why it happened. Right after permission was given, far beyond the tanker, the consequences began unfolding instantly. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a stretch of water. It is a pressure point for the entire global economy, a narrow artery through which energy flows to continents thousands of miles away. Nearly a fifth of the world's traded oil passes through it. Every hour matters. Every delay echoes outward. As word of the incident spread, ships waiting outside the strait slowed to a halt. Some cut engines entirely, drifting in controlled patterns while awaiting new instructions. No one wanted to be next. In distant financial centers, screens flickered with sudden volatility. Oil prices reacted before full details even emerged. Analysts began speculating. Governments moved into quiet coordination, because this wasn't just about one tanker. It was about uncertainty. And uncertainty in this region spreads faster than any physical threat. Insurance firms adjusted risk levels within hours. Premiums surged. Some routes were flagged as temporarily uninsurable. That alone was enough to slow movement, even if the strait remained technically open. But what made this moment different was timing. Only hours earlier, signals pointed toward de-escalation. The reopening of the passage had been framed as a controlled step toward stability, a fragile but real shift. Now that illusion was gone, because the attack didn't just disrupt movement, it shattered trust. And without trust, the entire system begins to hesitate. Ships don't move, markets don't stabilize, and pressure begins to build in places far removed from the water where the first shots were fired. Just hours before the gunfire, the mood had been different. Cautious, controlled, almost hopeful. Captains had been waiting for days outside the strait, monitoring every signal, every shift in tone. When clearance finally came, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like a calculated risk worth taking. Engines restarted. Navigation systems recalibrated. Ships began moving in slow, deliberate lines toward the passage. No one rushed. Everyone understood the stakes. But movement itself was a sign, a signal that something had changed. Or so it seemed. Behind that movement, military presence never faded. Surveillance systems continued scanning. Patrol routes remained active. Communications between forces stayed constant, though quieter, now less visible. The calm wasn't peace. It was control, a temporary alignment of decisions designed to hold tension in place. But tension doesn't disappear. It waits. And when it returns, it doesn't always give warning. When the shooting began, it didn't just interrupt operations, it rewrote the narrative of the entire situation. Because now, every decision made in those previous hours came under question. Was the reopening genuine? Or was it a test? A way to draw ships back into the corridor under controlled conditions? No one had answers. Only consequences. And the most dangerous part wasn't the gunfire itself. It was the realization that what looked like stability had been something else entirely. Something fragile. Something temporary. Something that could collapse without warning. The location of the attack wasn't random. It was precise. The Strait of Hormuz narrows into defined lanes where massive tankers are forced into predictable paths. There is no room for deviation, no space for rapid maneuvering. Ships must move slowly, carefully, and always within a confined corridor. That's what makes it dangerous. Not just because of who controls the surrounding coastline, but because of how little control ships have once they enter. Beneath the surface, depth varies. Outside the designated lanes, risks increase sharply. Navigational errors become catastrophic. Above the surface, visibility is limited by terrain and curvature. Fast-moving vessels can approach from angles that delay detection. This creates a unique kind of vulnerability, one that doesn't require overwhelming force to exploit. Small, fast boats can dominate the space. They don't need to engage directly. They don't need to win a battle. They only need to create doubt. A single warning shot can force a tanker to stop. A suspected mine, even unconfirmed, can halt traffic entirely. Because in a choke point like this, perception becomes reality. If captains believe the route is unsafe, they won't take it. And that's enough. On that day, the attack leveraged every one of these factors. Speed, positioning, timing. The vessels involved moved quickly, appearing and disappearing along the edges of visibility. They controlled the engagement without ever fully revealing themselves. It wasn't chaos. It was controlled disruption, designed not to destroy, but to influence behavior. And in that moment, it worked. Because one tanker turning back is not just a single event. It's a signal, one that travels faster than any vessel. Behind the gunfire, there was no randomness, only strategy. For days, pressure had been building not through direct conflict, but through restriction. A naval presence tightening around critical export routes, inspections increasing, movements monitored. From one perspective, it was enforcement. From another, it was suffocation. Economic pressure has a timeline. It doesn't strike instantly, but it accumulates. Every delayed shipment, every blocked route, every idle tanker adds weight. And eventually, that weight demands a response. The reopening of the strait had been part of that response. A signal, an opening move in a larger negotiation that was never spoken aloud. But signals require acknowledgement. And when that acknowledgement didn't come in the expected form, the dynamic shifted. Quickly, closing the strait even partially is not just a reaction. It's leverage. Because the impact extends far beyond the immediate region. It reaches into markets, into governments, into decisions being made far from the water itself. Now both sides face the same question. How far can pressure go before it triggers something irreversible? Because escalation doesn't always begin with intent. Sometimes it begins with miscalculation, a move interpreted differently than expected, a signal misunderstood. And in a region where every action carries weight, even a small shift can set off a chain reaction. The gunfire was just the visible part. The real conflict was unfolding beneath it, quietly, deliberately, and with consequences that were still unfolding. Beyond the immediate chaos, another presence held steady. Warships, positioned just far enough to observe, close enough to respond. They didn't move suddenly. They didn't broadcast intent. They watched. Advanced radar systems scanned the horizon continuously, tracking every vessel, every shift in movement. Patterns were analyzed in real time. Nothing was ignored. Inside these ships, the atmosphere was controlled but tense. Crew members rotated through stations with precision. No wasted motion, no unnecessary conversation. Everyone understood the stakes. Orders were clear. Hold position. Do not escalate. Be ready. That readiness wasn't visible from a distance, but it was constant. Weapon systems remained active. Aircraft stood prepared on nearby decks, engines capable of starting within minutes. This wasn't about dominance. It was about presence, a signal that the situation was being observed and that any further escalation would not go unanswered. But presence alone has limits, because it depends on restraint. And restraint depends on decisions made in seconds. If another incident occurred, if another vessel was struck, those decisions would come faster than ever before. And once made, they would be impossible to reverse. So the warships waited, not passive, not inactive, but poised. Balanced on the edge between observation and action. Time slowed, not in reality, but in perception. Every minute felt stretched, loaded with possibility. Command centers monitored live feeds from multiple sources, satellite imagery, radar data, intercepted communications. Information flowed constantly, but clarity remained elusive. What exactly had triggered the attack? Was it isolated or coordinated? Those answers mattered, because they determined response. Inside the decision rooms, options were evaluated rapidly. Deploy escorts, increase aerial surveillance, issue warnings, or escalate. Each option carried risk. Act too quickly, and the situation could spiral. Wait too long, and control could be lost. The balance was fragile, and everyone involved understood it. Meanwhile, in the strait itself, movement slowed even further. Ships adjusted positions. Some held completely still, unwilling to commit to forward motion. The silence between transmissions became heavier, because now every signal mattered. Every unidentified movement, every shift in behavior. The next shot, if it came, would not be interpreted the same way as the first. It would be seen as intent, and intent changes everything. The most dangerous possibility wasn't that one side wanted war. It was that both sides were preparing for it, without intending to start it. And in that space, between intention and preparation, escalation becomes almost inevitable. The tension built quietly, steadily, until it reached a point where even a small event could tip the balance. While the surface remained tense, deeper planning began. Quiet, methodical. Military strategists mapped movement patterns from the past 24 hours. Vessel speeds, approach angles, communication bursts, everything was analyzed for intent. Nothing was assumed. Because assumption leads to error, and error, in this environment, leads to escalation. Intelligence teams worked in parallel, cross-referencing data with known behaviors, identifying whether the attack matched established tactics or something new. That distinction mattered, because predictable patterns can be countered. Unpredictable ones cannot. At the same time, contingency plans were updated. Extraction routes, engagement thresholds, air support timing. Everything recalibrated based on a single factor: uncertainty. The goal was clear: contain the situation, apply pressure, avoid ignition. But achieving all three simultaneously required precision. Too much pressure could provoke. Too little could invite further action. And containment itself depended on cooperation that could disappear at any moment. This was the kind of planning that never appears in headlines. No dramatic movement. No visible action. Just decisions made quietly, shaping outcomes that haven't happened yet. Because in high-stakes environments, what doesn't happen is often more important than what does. And right now, preventing escalation was the mission. Even if no one outside those rooms realized it, everyone understood the scenario. No one wanted it to happen, but it had already been planned for. If another tanker was hit, the response would not be measured the same way. It would be immediate, layered, decisive. Warships would shift from observation to engagement posture. Aircraft would launch within minutes, targeting fast-moving vessels identified as threats. The objective wouldn't be warning. It would be control. In the confined space of the strait, that kind of response doesn't unfold gradually. It unfolds all at once. Explosive. Unavoidable. Ships caught in the corridor would have limited options. Turning takes time. Speed is restricted. Escape routes are narrow. Crew members would be exposed to a situation they cannot influence. And once escalation begins, it doesn't pause for reconsideration. Every action triggers a reaction. Every response invites another. The situation compounds rapidly. This is what makes the Strait uniquely dangerous. Not just because conflict can occur, but because it accelerates faster than most environments can contain. And right now, all of it depended on one variable: whether another shot would be fired. Because if it was, the shift from tension to confrontation would be immediate and irreversible. Outside the narrow corridor, the world waited. Tankers lined the horizon at a distance, maintaining position but refusing to advance. Engines idled, crews monitored updates that changed by the hour. No one trusted the passage. Not after what had happened. Even without further attacks, hesitation had taken hold. And hesitation is enough. Markets responded accordingly. Prices adjusted upward, reflecting risk rather than reality. Governments began preparing contingency plans, alternative routes, strategic reserves, emergency coordination, all triggered by minutes of gunfire. This is the power of a choke point. You don't need sustained disruption. You only need doubt. Because once doubt spreads, it changes behavior. Ships delay. Routes shift. Costs rise. And pressure extends far beyond the initial event. The strait remained technically open, but functionally, it was restricted, controlled not by physical barriers, but by uncertainty. And uncertainty is harder to remove than any obstacle, because it lingers, even after the immediate threat disappears. Right now, no one knew when movement would fully resume, or if it would. Night settled over the strait, bringing no resolution. Lights from distant vessels flickered across the dark water, steady but unmoving. Warships maintained position, their presence constant, unchanging. Nothing escalated, but nothing de-escalated either. The tension didn't break. It held, suspended between action and restraint. Communications continued, but cautiously. Every message was measured, every word chosen with precision. Because language itself had become part of the strategy. Too strong, and it provokes. Too weak, and it invites. So everything remained balanced. Deliberately, uncomfortably. This is what unresolved conflict looks like. Not explosions, not movement, but stillness filled with potential. Because everyone involved understands how quickly that stillness can collapse. One misread signal, one aggressive maneuver, one decision made under pressure, and everything changes. For now, nothing had crossed that line, but the line remained visible. And fragile, history rarely announces itself in real time. It doesn't always arrive with certainty or clarity. More often, it builds in moments like this. Quiet, tense, unresolved. A radar operator studies a contact moving just outside expected patterns. A commander reviews options, weighing consequences that extend far beyond immediate action. A ship's captain stands on the bridge, staring into darkness, deciding whether to move forward or wait. These are the moments that shape outcomes. Not dramatic, not visible, but decisive. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most dangerous places on Earth, not because of constant conflict, but because of how close it always is. How easily tension can shift into action. How quickly uncertainty can become crisis. Right now, the ships are still waiting. The warships are still watching. The balance is still holding. But somewhere, in the hours ahead, another decision will be made. Quietly, deliberately, and when it is, everything could change. Mission pending.